our closing keynote speaker. We're thrilled to be joined by Noreena Hertz. Noreena is an academic, an economist, and an author. She's also a television personality, former economics editor for ITV News, covering the 2016 referendum and its aftermath, including the most recent general election. She was one of the few economists to predict a global financial crisis. Her work was the inspiration for Bono's product Red, which partners with iconic brands around the world to contribute up to 50% of their profits to help fight AIDS. She created Footballers for Nurses campaign, where half the Premier League footballers gave up a day's wages to support local nurses. She's a professor at UCL. She runs her own radio show in the US, Megahertz London Calling, and she's going to be talking to us today about Generation K, those employees born 15 to 24 years old. So please put your hands together for Noreena Hertz.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, yes, I write books and I advise CEOs. I'm on the board of Warner Music Group and I have a radio show. But I'm also a university professor. And it's in that capacity that about 4 years ago, I realized that something very significant was going on. That the students I was teaching were significantly different to students I'd been teaching in the past. They had different values, different beliefs. The way that they were working, the way that they were studying was different. And because I'm an economist, but who works right at the intersection of business, economics, and society, I decided to embark on a major research project to really understand who this post-millennial generation are, a generation that I call Generation K, today's 15 to 24-year-olds. Now, it's the 4 years of research that I've conducted on this demographic that I want to share with you today. I've conducted surveys, interviews, focus groups. I've worked with a number of companies in helping them better engage this generation, both from the point of view as customers, but also as employees. So it's these real world and also academic insights that I want to share with you today. But why should you even be interested in this generation? I mean, looking around the room, you're all relatively young. So I don't know, do any of you have children in this generation? Oh, okay, all right. Well, for those of you who do have children, this isn't going to be a session giving you parenting tips necessarily, although you're happy to receive them. All right, and for those of you who aren't, don't worry, because this presentation is really about why this generation matters to you as business leaders. They matter first in terms of their buying power. This generation already consumes £130 billion in Europe, Middle East and Africa. Obviously, this amount is only going to be growing. But also, within 2 years, a third of the global workforce is going to be within this generation. So you've probably been thinking a lot about the millennials, but this generation is, really round the corner. So what do we know about this generation? Well, obviously, they've been massively shaped by technology. I mean, this is the first digital native generation. This is the generation that came of age with the iPhone. Always on, perma-connected, multi-screening, multitasking. If the millennials came to the technology party early, this generation doesn't even remember what it's like to be pre-digital. They have radically transformed their lives so that they're now living a significant part of it online. They spend 8 hours a day online. They shop online, bank online, consume news online, date online, find jobs online. And this generation are not even doing all of this at the click of a mouse. They're doing it on the swipe of their smartphone, because this really is the smartphone generation. So technology has radically shaped them. But that isn't the only force that has shaped them. they've been shaped by two other distinct forces. The first is the economic downturn that this generation really came of age during. This is the generation that came of age during the 2008 financial crisis. They saw their parents tightening their belts. They saw family, friends, or even members of their family losing their jobs, maybe even losing their homes. This generation has witnessed financial hardships around them, which makes them much more pragmatic than the millennials who, entered the workforce with more of a sense of entitlement. This generation know that they need to work hard and are prepared to do so. They've also been shaped by this world of existential threat that they inhabit. So this is the generation that have lived through the Manchester and London attacks. They've lived through the Bataclan horrors. They've lived through the rise of Al-Qaeda and then ISIS. This is the generation that have experienced bombings, terrorist attacks in their hometowns, whether it's Berlin, Barcelona, or Brussels. It's not that the world is objectively more dangerous than it was before. It's just that they're experiencing danger in a fundamentally different way. They're experiencing it 24/7 on their smartphones. And it's this combination of factors, downturn, technology, danger, that has made me define this generation as Generation K. K is after Katniss Everdeen, the heroine of the Hunger Games franchise, because unlike for the older millennials, the yes we can generation, who grew up thinking that the world was their oyster, for this generation, the world is less oyster, more Hobbesian nightmare. Dystopian, unequal, harsh. So what does that mean? How does this all manifest in how they behave, in what they believe, in what they value? I just want to take you through some of their key traits. The first is this generation is profoundly anxious. The figures are really startling. 1 in 5 US high school students has contemplated suicide. In the United Kingdom, the number of girls who self-harm has trebled over the past 10 years. In fact, in studies that have been done in 19 countries on mental health of this generation, they found that in every country, mental health was considerably worse for this generation than it was a decade ago. And it's not just that they're worried about big global issues, as well as, of course, usual young person things, boyfriend, girlfriend, schoolwork, university work. It's not just that they're also worried about big global issues. 70% worry about terrorism, 76% worry about climate change. They're also very worried about their own economic futures, about their own financial stability. 72% of this generation are worried about getting into debt. And when you think we're talking about 15 to 24-year-olds, that is a stark figure. And it's not just student debt. When I drilled into this, when I was working with a financial institution, what I found was that it was debt in general. They were worried about getting into debt later in their lives, about taking out a mortgage. Just the concept of debt really worried about them. They're really worried about how their own economic futures will pan out. In a focus group, I asked them to draw what they felt their economic futures would look like, and as you can see, it's pretty bleak. Okay, so they're profoundly anxious. The second trait of this generation is that they are very distrustful of traditional institutions. 60%, that is the percentage of adults, people our age, who trust big corporations to do the right thing. What percentage of Generation K do you think trusts big corporations to do the right thing? 20? Anyone else? 6. 6% of this generation trust big corporations to do the right thing. The social contract between this generation and big corporations has been broken. How to repair it is something we'll discuss a bit later. The third trait of this generation, they may be the selfie generation, but it'd be wrong, and they do take a lot of selfies. This generation spends 15 minutes at least every day taking photographs and then sharing them and posting them online. In China, actually, the figure's hugely, hugely more. They're having a kind of selfie crisis, it seems, almost. But yeah, it'd be wrong to think of them, even though they are the selfie generation, as selfish, because this generation volunteers more, campaigns more, gives more to charity as a percentage of their income than any other generation. And it was actually very interesting in the light of what's been happening over the past couple of months on gender equality, that of all the things they're concerned about and care about, what my research found was that equality was what they care about the most. Economic equality, racial equality, societal equality, gender equality. 80% of this generation support transgender rights. Okay, next trait. And this was surprising to me in my research. I had imagined that this generation who are always on, who are perma-connected, who are constantly texting and Instagramming and snapping, would feel very connected. But actually what I found was that this generation feels profoundly lonely and is really craving connection, despite or perhaps because of being constantly on their phones. So that was a counterintuitive finding. So I wanted to dig a bit deeper into that one to really understand it better. And I think this guy helps explain kind of what they're looking for, their craving for connection. Does anyone know who this is? Okay, his name is Daniel Middleton. I think somebody in the back was saying that. Daniel Middleton, you may better know him by his YouTube handle, DanTDM, or maybe not. He has 17.8 million subscribers, and his videos have been viewed over 12 billion times. And I really recommend just going and looking at him on YouTube, because I think it gives you a sense of what this generation are craving for when you kind of try and unpack who he is. He's quirky looking, reasonably cute, but I don't think that's his appeal. For this generation who really prize authenticity, he comes across 100% real. He jokes, he goofs around, he hangs out online. Oh, by the way, he doesn't do anything, just in case you're wondering what he does. I mean, he doesn't sing, he doesn't dance, he doesn't act. He films himself playing video games. So just so you know what he does. I guess he plays video games. But when you look at him, you're kind of looking at a guy hanging out in his bedroom in his tracksuit. And that is his appeal, because for this generation, and he knows it actually, for this generation, he's their friend. I mean, in fact, he has said it himself. He said, I behave like I'm their friend playing video games with them. My fans feel that I'm their friend. So this generation is really lonely and really craving connection. Again, a finding that I didn't expect. I had thought that this generation would be really indifferent between virtual connection and face-to-face connection and interaction. But it turned out they weren't. They absolutely value face-to-face interaction significantly more than they do virtual. I mean, for them, shared experiences, going to gigs, going to amusement parks, going to escape rooms, I mean, these shared experiences are what they really covet. 80% of this generation say that they'd rather interact with a friend physically, face-to-face. 85% say that at work, they'd rather interact with a colleague face-to-face than via email or over the phone. Another insight into this generation, the sixth insight. this is a generation who are really trying to figure out, in this world of information overload, what to trust and who to believe. And the way that they are figuring it out is through the direct experiences of others. So this isn't a generation who are influenced by brands or by employers. This is a generation who are influenced by customers and by employees. You know, when they're looking for a holiday, they'll go on TripAdvisor. When they're looking to buy something, they'll read the Amazon reviews. Or when they're looking to check out a restaurant, they'll go on Yelp. When they're looking where to work, they'll go to Glassdoor. So this is a generation for whom your experience is their evidence, for whom word of mouth is absolutely essential. Seventh insight about this group. So this is a generation of creators. And I'm going to give you an example to illustrate this point. Again, does anyone know who Hatsune Miku is? Don't worry, I didn't either before I went to Japan, that is. But let me just give you a taste of who she is. She's one of Japan's biggest pop stars. She plays huge, huge auditoriums, size of Wembley Stadium. Huge star. And this is a clip of her in concert. And, okay, so she's pretty unusual, yeah? She's not a real person, she's a hologram. So that's pretty unusual. But that isn't why I'm using her as an example for my speech. I'm using her as an example because she is the world's first co-created pop star. Her fans create her costumes. They decide her hairstyle. They write her music. They write the lyrics of her songs. By being part of the Hatsune Miku phenomenon, she has an army of unbelievably loyal fans, because this is a generation of creators, makers, inventors, whether it's the 16-year-old girl who's asked for a sewing machine for Christmas, or the 20-year-old who's coding in her bedroom, or the 24-year-old who's editing videos on his smartphone. This is a generation who don't just want to passively consume, don't just want to passively act on briefs. They want to be part of the design and creation process themselves. And they want to put their own stamp on things. In a series of open-ended questions, one of them I asked was, what word would you use to describe yourself? And unique was a word, so that's open-ended questionnaire that came up over 70% of the time. This is a generation that sees themselves as unique and expects to be able to put their own stamp on things. As one of the girls I interviewed, Sarah, 16, said to me, she said, for me, being unique is about wearing what I want to wear, thinking what I want to think, having my own points of view. Okay, so selfish, not selfish, selfie taking but not selfish. Distrustful yet communitarian. Caring yet sceptical. This is quite an unusual generation. And what I want to do in this last part of my speech is just give you a few thoughts on how you as employers, what that means for you, what it means for how you might want to better engage, recruit, retain them. Now, these are, of course, just going to be top-line thoughts. I'll just quickly go through 5 top-line thoughts. Obviously, when I work with companies, we spend months coming up with very customised recruitment and retention strategies. But I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the things to be thinking about when you're thinking about managing this generation. Okay, the first. If you really want to get this generation on side, you have to convince them that you really do care about the issues that they care about, and that you're willing to do something about it. I mean, this generation they're very adept at sniffing out marketing spin. So for this generation, they really want to see their companies doing something about it, doing something to make an impact. In fact, 93% of this generation say that a company's impact on society affects whether or not they want to work for them. So what are some examples of companies that I think have been leading the pack in this way? Well, Johnson & Johnson is a great example. Johnson & Johnson chose Jazz Jennings, a 14-year-old transgender girl, to front their Clean and Clear campaign. So this isn't a company going, yeah, we support transgender rights. I mean, this is a company really walking the talk, putting its head above the parapet, choosing a transgender girl to front a campaign. I'm talking about what Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, did in the wake of Trump's immigration ban last year. He announced that Airbnb would enable anyone affected by that ban to stay for free in their accommodations. That's putting your head above the parapet. It's walking the talk. It's acting in an authentic way. But it's also about convincing your employees that you care because you're enabling them to care more effectively. Salesforce is a great example of that. Salesforce provide its employees with 6 paid voluntary work days, so they get 6 days off, which they can use to do voluntary work, and they also give them $1,000 each employee to give to a charity of their choice. So you really need to convince them that you care about the issues they care about, and also that you are willing to help them care about the issues they care about. But you also need to care directly about them, because for this very anxious generation, as employers, you're going to have to provide a level of pastoral care that you just didn't have to provide to previous generations. We saw how anxious they are about their future financial and economic security. So what can you do to help them alleviate these fears? And I'm sure that there's some interesting ways that you can work with Benefex in this regard, thinking about how you could help them visualize better their future earning streams, their savings, etc. It's also about helping them when it comes to their mental health and their anxieties. And there's a number of companies that have really been doing great things. I'm just going to name these: American Express, Pepsi, Prudential, Jaguar, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young. I'm sorry if your company's doing great things and I haven't included you, but these are all companies that I know are really doing quite meaningful things in the workplace, whether it's providing free counselling to employees, whether it's about providing flexible working for people who are feeling anxious, whether it's providing on-site mental health support or peer-to-peer kind of schemes for mental health. These are companies doing something to show their employees that they care. And another example is a company that really did something significant when times were really dark for many of its employees. And think about Starbucks here, which also in the wake of Trump's immigration ban in the United States said that it would provide free legal advice to any of its employees who were holding visas from countries which were hit by the immigration ban. That's really showing them, we're your employer and we care. For those of you who are in sectors where you employ a lot of EU nationals here in the UK, is there more that you could be doing in order to alleviate their fears around what their existence will be like here post-Brexit, for example? So really kind of showing them that you care, because for this generation, for whom experience is evidence, for this generation who you want more than anything to be your brand ambassadors, so that you can recruit with greater ease, showing them that you care, I think is really essential. Third recommendation. If you want to really engage this generation, you have to connect with them, and you have to facilitate ways that they can connect more with each other. Speak to their need for face-to-face connections. Speak to their loneliness and do something about it. Now, as I said, I'm on the board of Warner Music Group. Bruno Mars is up here because it was the Grammys on Sunday, and we won many, many awards, led largely by Bruno Mars. So I thought I'd put a photo of Bruno Mars there. But Warner Music Group has a very young, skewing workforce, as you might imagine. They're in the music industry. And they've done a couple of things which I think are really interesting that I wanted to share with you. First, they did an audit of their internal emails, of their emails, sorry, not their internal emails, their emails. And what they found was that 50% of emails were coming from people, were between people within the building. The majority between people just a few desks from each other. And so, having done the audit and made it transparent, they actually kind of started a program where they encouraged employees to send less emails. To think about whether they needed to CC or BCC someone, to think about whether it was just better to actually just walk those two desks and speak to the other person. And just by being more mindful about emails, email traffic fell by 15%. Productivity went up, and employees reported being much happier. The other thing they did, which I thought was really interesting, was they banned mobile phones from meetings. So in every meeting that you go to there now, you have to put your mobile phone in a basket outside the room. And again, employees really loved it, especially the younger employees. They felt more in the meeting, more connected. So helping them connect is really important. There's also another aspect of helping them connect that I think is useful to think about for you in this room. For our generation, the yearly appraisal was the standard. But for this generation, who are permanently connected, always on, always online, the idea of being appraised just once a year just really doesn't make sense. And so what we're seeing is an increasing number of companies, Netflix, Google, Adobe, Microsoft, Dell, GE, just a few, who've replaced annual appraisals with continuous performance management, where they're having monthly check-ins with the employees, where they're talking about performance, discussing where they're at. And again, this has been really welcomed by this younger generation who really found it kind of anathema to the way they lived, this idea that they would only be assessed every year. Final recommendation for this generation. If you want to really reach this generation and engage them, you need to customize. Sorry, I've actually got two more recommendations. You need to customize their job to some degree. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that that there aren't things that they need to do, that there aren't briefs that have to be completed, that there aren't tasks that need to be done. But I think for this generation who are so used to customizing everything from sneakers to online identities, thinking smartly about how they can customize at least elements of their job is really, really important. I mean, Google's a company that's really letting employees, at least to some extent, customize what their brief is. And again, getting higher levels of employee engagement as a result. In fact, 56% of this generation say that they would rather write their own job description than work to a generic one. Now, again, I agree, that may be going a bit far, writing your whole job description, but this generation have amazing skills. This is this generation of creators, co-creators. So thinking about how you can bring their skills, their passions into the job description, I think is really worth thinking about. Finally, if you are to reach this generation, if you are to engage them, you really need to communicate with them where they are and in the ways that they communicate. I wanted to share a couple of examples from recruitment that I think are interesting in this regard. The first is this kind of wave of new startup companies where they're like recruitment dating apps, where employees can swipe right or left, as can employers, and also upload video video resumes. So one of them's JobSnap. It's really focusing, it's in the States, it's really focusing on hospitality and retail. These are sectors where, you know, it makes sense that an employer would like to see a video of the person because you can see how personable they were, if they got people skills, how empathetic they are. You can get a sense of that from a video. And they're working now with a number of big retailers from Forever 21 to American Girl and big hospitality groups from Taco Bell to Starwood. So, and there's another comparable company, Switch in the States, which works with recruiting people from tech companies. So I think that's an interesting phenomenon, growing phenomenon to be aware of if you're not already. I think another example that was really interesting that I came across a few months ago was what Edelman, the PR company, did. I don't know if you're familiar with it, what they did in their recruitment process last year. What they did was they actually, everyone who applied got rejected. And then they sent them all a note saying, if you want to apply, you have got to actually play this digital treasure hunt. And they put clues on everywhere from Airbnb to Amazon Books to in Shazam. They even inserted clues onto a kind of BuzzFeed Mandarin cooking lesson. And what they found was that applications increased by 860%, and the caliber of people that they recruited at the end, they said, was significantly higher. So how can you communicate with this generation in their way? How can you communicate with them on their phones? These are things really to be thinking about. Okay, so I've really quickly covered just 5 top-line thoughts on how you as employers can better engage and better retain and better recruit this generation, a generation who are really different to older millennials. And of course, these are top-line thoughts, as I said, and of course, if I was working with a company, we'd go in much more detail and customize it directly for them. But if you want to engage this generation, you need to better connect with them. If you want to be trusted by this generation, you need to better evolve alongside of them. If you want to be valued by this generation, you need to adapt alongside them. We all do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. We're going to move on to Slido to see if there's any questions that have been submitted for Noreena.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Okay, so I don't know if you can read that. The top question: by making our business apps more gamified and mimic social apps, are we in danger of compounding issues of anxiety around the need for recognition and belonging?
Well, I think it's how you use them. I mean, I think this generation clearly is the gaming generation. They're the Pokemon Go generation. So I think if it's a way to engage, attract, which is why I think the Edelman way strategy was really smart, especially they're a creative industry. I'm thinking we want those sorts of people. I think that's fine. I'm not suggesting that you replace face-to-face interaction with some sort of kind of simulated video game. So I think it's about using these in a smart way.
And the next question, how do large organisations build trust with Generation K? Is it a permanently broken contract?
I mean, this is a tough question for a lot of companies, and that 6% stat is pretty shocking. And it's part of a kind of broader distrust this generation have with the economic system we live in even. There was recent research that came out which showed a kind of significant number of this generation feeling a real discomfort with capitalism, for example. So, I mean, this is quite hard stuff for companies to grapple with. I think most important way is around the convince slide, which is about convincing that you actually share their concerns. But you have, I mean, I cannot stress enough how much this has to be authentic. I don't know if any of you saw the Pepsi campaign with Kendall Jenner. Is it Kendall? Yeah, Kendall Jenner. So for those of you who haven't seen it, again, it's worth going online and seeing how a company, even a company as sophisticated as Pepsi, can get something so wrong in this regard. They had Kendall Jenner, who's one of the Kardashians, kind of looking all glamorous, coming to a protest and then handing over a can of Pepsi to the policeman, all set against some kind of 60s type music. I mean, there was a huge backlash against Pepsi as a result amongst this generation, who just saw this as so inauthentic and crass. So it's about, I think, really taking some leadership in some key areas and thinking about what can you truthfully and authentically do as a company to speak to this in them.
Thank you. And pardon the pun, the $1 million question, does this generation care about their salary?
Yes. Yeah, I think that comes out of the growing up shaped by the global financial crisis. So yes, one of the things I found was, they do care about how much they earn, for sure. And they're willing to work hard, that's the good news. So yeah, they definitely care about what they're going to earn, and they are willing to work hard to get it as well. They recognise the precariousness of jobs in a way that perhaps earlier generations didn't.
And one last question that probably links into what you've just said. Was there any trend in Generation K and starting companies freelancing? So I guess this is Generation K started their own businesses, becoming entrepreneurs, and obviously the gig economy and freelancing.
Yes. So what I'm seeing in my research is that a considerable percentage are either doing or interested in doing gigs on the side of their jobs. So they may be working, but in the evening, I don't know, doing a Kickstarter campaign or offering a service on TaskRabbit at the same time. So more than the older millennials, what I found is that even though they are entrepreneurial, they also value the security of a job. And so I think the challenge for employers is how do you speak to their entrepreneurial bents, but also give them that safety that they crave.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Noreena. And thank you. And there we have it. So that closes the Benefex Winter Forum for another year. We actually have something to tell you about. So we are working through Tusker to arrange a mini challenge. Tusker will be driving around our offices, seeing how many people our clients can fit in a mini, and there'll be prizes for the most people crammed in. I struggle to fit my own car on my own, let alone anyone else. Also, don't forget that you can sign up to our Employee Experience Conference in May. You have a discount code in your goodie bag that will get you preferential rates. It will be the premier Employee Experience Conference in the UK, so we're all looking forward to that. And yeah, pick up the information inside your goodie bags and you can register. So thank you again for everyone for coming. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the providers and partners that are out in the Benefexpo. Thank you to our marketing team. Putting on these types of events takes a huge amount of work and a lot of resilience. So thank you, Emily, Sarah, Grace, Sophie, Ryan, and obviously all the product team for the effort they put in to make the products ready to show you today and to demonstrate all of those outside. So the last thing to say is, it's the end of dry January, so you can go outside and help yourselves to a drink. Thanks very much for coming.